New statutory guidance for RSHE was released in July 2025. By September 2026, all schools need to have developed a policy and an RSHE programme that is aligned with the new guidance. There is a range of legal requirements schools must consider to make sure they are compliant, but equally significant is their RSHE's programme's effectiveness at meeting the needs of the pupils and families they serve. To produce an effective RSHE programme, schools need to ensure teaching is pursuing a clear aim. The first sentence of the guidance states, "Children and young people need knowledge and skills that will enable them to make informed and ethical decisions about their well-being, health and relationships." Ethics is about what is good and right, what is bad and wrong. There have been thousands of years of discourse over what good is, and consequently what is right, bad or wrong. Therefore, an effective RSHE programme will allow pupils to explore the ethical questions raised by the subject, not just the factual content. This will often require comparison of different moral views, especially on those areas that are most sensitive and contentious. For many people, views on these topics are informed by religious beliefs, and these religious perspectives will need to be fairly considered, not just non-religious perspectives. The guidance urges schools to adopt high-quality, evidence-based teaching that promotes the moral, social, mental and physical development of young people and stresses the positive moral characteristics that should be cultivated through effective RSHE. An effective programme, therefore, should improve young people's moral character, health and well-being, and equip them to confidently and independently approach ethical decision-making. The final sentence emphasises that the goal of RSHE is to protect children and young people from harm by identifying when things are not right. Sometimes RSHE will be the catalyst for a young person identifying harm in their lives, but the overriding outcome of high quality and effective RSHE should be the improved mental and physical health and well-being of young people through their ability to make independent, positive, moral choices, supporting them to recognise and avoid harm to themselves and others.
When considering a school's duty to comply with the law, the starting point is acknowledging that the RSHE guidance is statutory, which means schools cannot ignore it. It states schools must have regard to the guidance, and where they depart from those parts of the guidance which state they should or should not do something, they will need to have good reasons for doing so. This is grounded in the 2002 Education Act, Section 80A, and the Education Independent School Standards Regulations 2014. Schools are therefore expected to follow the guidance unless they have a clear reason not to. For example, some other legal requirement they need to comply with, such as their trust deed. But because the guidance is flexible, this will be rare. Also, of crucial significance when developing an RSHE programme is the legal obligation that the Secretary of State and local authorities shall have regard to the general principle that pupils are to be educated in accordance with the wishes of their parents. Parents are the principal educators of their children, and schools educate them on behalf of their parents, and with parents' consent. Schools must give serious consideration to whether they can accommodate parents' wishes when developing their RSHE programme. While it won't be possible to do what every parent wants, schools must not just sideline parents' wishes. Parental concerns may include the content of RSHE, how it is delivered, what resources are used, and at what age it's appropriate to introduce some content. There is an absolute legal requirement that schools must consult parents before writing or revising their RSHE policy, and the guidance encourages full and transparent communication and consultation with them. Schools must remain impartial on political issues. This is required by the 1996 Education Act, Section 406, 1B1, and the Education Independent School Standards Regulations 5C. This ban on indoctrination in schools is the law. Schools are not allowed to advance a political agenda and must not promote any political ideology. It's important to understand what this means. In 2007, a school governor challenged the Department for Education's distribution of Al Gore's climate change film, An Inconvenient Truth, in all state schools. He argued it violated the Education Act 1996 by promoting partisan political views. The High Court agreed that the film was one-sided and ordered the department to issue guidance to schools requiring context to be provided to ensure that the overall presentation to pupils was balanced and objective. Discussing the meaning of the word partisan, the court judgment cited the claimant's lawyer as having helpfully suggested that there were factors that could be considered in determining whether the expression or promotion of a particular view could evidence or indicate partisan promotion of those views. These included a superficial treatment of the subject matter, presenting controversial statements as if they are self-evidently true, not acknowledging where there is debate, being one-sided, misrepresenting evidence with half-truths, presentation of material that does not allow meaningful critical analysis by pupils, glorifying one side's motives and demonising the other, and suggesting the only moral course of action is for pupils to align themselves with one side on a debated issue. So the requirement to be politically impartial is not simply about avoiding the promotion of a political party. Schools must not endorse or promote contested social and philosophical ideological beliefs and movements of any sort. Examples of this would include urging pupils to support a particular side in the Israel-Palestine conflict, advocating belief in gender identity or for pupils to become trans allies, promoting school events, encouraging pupils to support the Pride movement, or teaching a sex-positive approach to sexual identity and expression as if it is the only perspective. Education law requires head teachers to take steps to secure the balanced presentation of opposing views when political issues are brought to the attention of pupils, and to forbid the promotion of partisan political views in the teaching of any subject in the school. This could involve providing training for teachers so that they are fully aware of their responsibility to be politically impartial, or making sure policies on potentially controversial areas such as RSHE are balanced and include a section explaining teachers' duties in this regard. On the Education Hub, the government provides guidance to teachers on political impartiality, stating teachers absolutely can talk about politics and they're encouraged to do so. What they shouldn't do, though, is present their own or anyone else's political views as fact. As a general principle, they should avoid expressing their own personal political views to pupils unless they are confident this will not amount to promoting that view to pupils. In the court case on Al Gore's film, the judge made an important distinction between presenting and promoting, which is helpful to head teachers and teachers, stating what is forbidden by the statute is political indoctrination. If a teacher uses the platform of a classroom to promote partisan political views in the teaching of any subject, then that would offend against the statute. If, on the other hand, a teacher presents to his pupils as part of the syllabus a film or document which itself promotes in a partisan way some political view, that cannot possibly, in my judgment, be the mischief against which the statute was intended to protect pupils. It would not only lead to bland education, but to education which did not give the opportunity to pupils to learn about views with which they might, vehemently or otherwise, either agree or disagree. Regarding balanced presentation, he concluded the word balanced in law means fair and dispassionate. Schools must safeguard RSHE from being used as a conduit to promote a political agenda and must resist internal or external pressure to do so. RSHE is still being manipulated by campaign groups to promote their ideologies in schools, both through visits and through supplying or influencing resources. This has resulted in the teaching of their contested beliefs as fact, with no balanced presentation of opposing views, causing confusion and harm to children and families, contrary to the aims of RSHE. If this is happening in classrooms of your school, it is breaching the law. Many of the changes in the new RSHE guidance reflect a need to safeguard children and young people from indoctrination of this kind. These changes also help to ensure that human rights legislation on education is honoured with regard to respecting the religious and philosophical convictions of parents. Significantly, that in relation to education and to teaching, the state shall respect the right of parents to ensure such education and teaching in conformity with their own religious and philosophical convictions. One further requirement of education law for maintained schools is that when they deliver any sex education, they must encourage pupils to have due regard to moral considerations and the value of family life, which includes learning the nature of marriage and civil partnership and its importance for family life and the bringing up of children. This crucial area is often neglected in RSHE, despite overwhelming objective evidence of the health, well-being and economic advantages of stable family life. Research from the Centre for Social Justice, its report Family Structure Still Matters, concluded that family structure, that's whether parents are married or unmarried, remains the single most important influence on stability. This remains so even when controlled for income and education. Just one example from their research states that by the time they turn 5, 53% of children of cohabiting parents will have experienced their parents' separation. Among 5-year-olds with married parents, this is 15%. These differences matter because family stability has been shown to profoundly affect children's outcomes. Like many areas of RSHE, the nature of marriage and its importance for family life needs to be taught sensitively. But if children are to make informed and ethical decisions about relationships, consideration of the moral and practical implications of marriage and family life must not be sidelined. Many of the positive moral characteristics set out in the guidance, such as resilience, self-worth, self-respect, honesty, integrity, courage, kindness, and trustworthiness, are essential ingredients for healthy and successful marriages and wholesome family life. One final consideration is the Equality Act. Many schools believe they must teach in depth about certain protected characteristics under equality legislation. This is just not true. The Equality Act's chapter on schools states that it does not apply to anything done in connection with the content of the curriculum, and that includes the content of RSHE teaching. State-funded schools, along with other public bodies, also have a public sector equality duty to have due regard to the need to advance equality of opportunity between persons who share a relevant protected characteristic and persons who do not share it, and foster good relations between persons who share a relevant protected characteristic and persons who do not share it. These are aims to which the school must have due regard alongside its other duties in its work in general. In fostering good relations, it's important not to promote the interests of people holding one protected characteristic over against another. That would undermine good relations. Though not specific to RSHE, independent schools, including academies, must also meet standards about the spiritual, moral, social and cultural development of pupils that include ensuring that principles are actively promoted which encourage respect for other people, paying particular regard to the protected characteristics set out in the 2010 Act. That's the Equality Act. Fulfilling this duty begins with identifying what the principle or principles are that the school will actively promote. For a school with a Christian character or ethos, this could be the belief that all people are equally made in God's image, and so every person, without exception, has an inherent dignity which must be respected. Of course, that will need to be translated into language pupils will understand. That could take the form of a memorable phrase or slogan that can be consistently applied across the work of the school, such as in its behaviour policy, particularly in primary schools, which will help demonstrate consistency of approach to an inspector. At some stage in a pupil's school career, this principle will need to be specifically applied in relation to each of the 9 protected characteristics under the Equality Act 2010. Many schools suffer from tunnel vision and fall into the trap of focusing almost exclusively on just 2 or 3 of these 9 characteristics. To be clear, this requirement is not specifically connected to RSHE, and in fact, fulfilling it elsewhere in the curriculum may avoid a disproportionate emphasis on just some of the protected characteristics. So in summary, when developing a compliant RSHE programme, schools must not ignore the RSHE guidance or parents' wishes. Schools must not push any political ideology in RSHE and must present a balanced presentation of opposing views. Parents cannot dictate RSE curriculum content, but where parents' wishes can be practically accommodated without breaching a school's other legal obligations, they should be, especially regarding sensitive areas of RSE and how and when content is taught. There is no requirement to promote any particular view on LGBT issues, providing the school meets its duty to promote respect for people and has regard to the guidance.
Schools need to be prepared for Ofsted. Ignoring law or the RSHE guidance can be costly. St Leonard's Catholic School in Durham failed to consult parents about their new RSE curriculum. This contributed to the school being downgraded from good to requires improvement back in 2022. The school ensured that parents had been consulted before their subsequent Ofsted monitoring visit. Likewise, at the big creative independent school in London, Ofsted observed that the school had not consulted parents on their RSHE programme and had not checked that their curriculum covered all of statutory content. Ofsted deemed that the school was limiting pupils' personal development. Consequently, it was designated requires improvement for personal development, the quality of education and for leadership and management. And these examples illustrate problems that can be readily avoided. If schools have not thoroughly consulted parents in the past, the revision of the guidance gives the opportunity for schools to do so now and avoid the risk of Ofsted finding the school in breach of the law or the risk of legal action by parents. Schools must also be prepared for the quality of crucial areas of RSHE to be scrutinised as part of an Ofsted inspection and be able to explain any departure from RSHE guidance, supplying evidence if required. The guidance states, Key aspects of RHE are in scope for Ofsted inspection, for example, through inspectors' consideration of pupils' personal development, behaviour and welfare, and spiritual, moral, social and cultural development. As preparation, schools can examine the School Inspection Toolkit to see how RSHE will most likely be inspected. Areas of personal development cross over into RSHE, and these programmes are integrated in many schools. The toolkit states that evidence will be gathered relating to those factors that contribute most strongly to personal development and well-being. There are several relevant factors that are listed, including developing pupils' character so they can reflect wisely, and developing pupils' confidence, resilience and knowledge so that they can keep themselves mentally healthy. An RSHE specific factor is developing pupils' age-appropriate understanding of healthy relationships through relationships and sex education. The importance of RSHE being age-appropriate is emphasised. It also needs to be developmentally appropriate for students with special educational needs and disabilities. When gathering evidence on the personal development programme, including spiritual, moral, social and cultural development, inspectors need to consider the extent to which pupils develop their ability to be reflective about their own beliefs, religious or otherwise, and respect for different people's faiths, feelings and values. Good RSHE provision can make an important contribution to this, alongside enabling children and young people to make informed and ethical decisions about their well-being, health and relationships, and developing their moral character. Inspectors will consider the extent to which pupils develop their ability to recognise the difference between right and wrong, including understanding the consequences of their behaviour and actions and readily applying this understanding in their own lives, recognising legal boundaries and respecting the civil and criminal law of England, and offering reasoned views about moral and ethical issues. Effective RSHE should enable pupils to recognise right and wrong, understand the ethics of sensitive and contentious issues, as well as to know the law. RSHE involves sensitive issues, some of which are contentious. Adopting a balanced approach that gives a fair account of different people's views and respects the school's duty of political impartiality is crucial. Pupils' and teachers' rights to free speech and to freedom of religion and belief must also be respected. In 2021, the American School of London was downgraded from outstanding to requires improvement after an Ofsted inspection. The report referenced concerns raised around the promotion by some staff of political and partisan views, and that not everyone felt that they are able to express their views freely in class. A significant number felt that their voices are not encouraged or in some cases are suppressed. In Ofsted's recommendations for improvement, it stated, while recognising the importance of promoting equalities, a significant minority of parents and pupils told inspectors that a culture had developed where alternative opinions are not felt welcome. In some classrooms, teaching has not allowed for questioning or for the balanced presentation of opposing views. Leaders and trustees should ensure that teaching does not preclude tolerance of those with different views, particularly where specific partisan or political views are presented. In a subsequent monitoring inspection, Ofsted identified the steps that the school had taken to ensure good practice at the school. Those resulted in the school regaining an outstanding rating in under 2 years. These steps are worth examining as they are the model of what all schools should be doing. Ofsted observed that refreshed and in some cases fully redrafted curriculum subject plans reflect the substantial and thorough work of leaders and staff to address any imbalance in subject content, and that they had checked the content of all teaching resources in use in classrooms to ensure that none supports an unbalanced presentation of opposing views. To support this work, the school has reviewed the content of displays around the school, including in corridors and in classrooms. New guidance for staff ensures that these consistently avoid prompting one-sided views to pupils. Leaders have made sure that expectations for any visitors coming into school to speak to pupils are set out clearly to maintain a balanced presentation of any viewpoints. Possibly most significantly, Ofsted observed that training designed and delivered by the school's senior leaders for all staff has helped staff understand and know how to take a fair and dispassionate approach when presenting views on political issues. If RSHE teaching is biased, presents a one-sided perspective on moral and ethical issues, or is not politically impartial, it will not only contravene education and, at state-funded schools, human rights legislation, it will fail to develop the depth of ethical reflection and consideration of right and wrong, which the government intends to be an important element of RSHE.
The new statutory guidance places a greater emphasis on transparency, engagement, and openness with parents. It instructs schools that they should ensure parents are aware of sex education content within lessons in advance. But this process begins with the formulation of the school's RSHE policy. Whenever the school is planning to write or review its policy on RSE, the law requires it to first consult parents. Regarding maintained schools, the Education Act 2002 states, the governing body must consult parents of registered pupils at the school before making or revising their RSE policy. The Education Independent School Standards Regulations 2014 similarly states the standard is met if the school consults parents of registered pupils at the school before making or revising their RSE policy. Consultation doesn't mean telling parents what the school will do. That is informing parents, not consulting them. Consultation means getting feedback from parents. It must be done before writing or revising the policy, because that feedback needs to be conscientiously considered before the school policy is finalised. This is not a tick box exercise where the school can just include a line in a parent newsletter and think their job is done. The gunning principles are a set of criteria used in law to determine what is required for a public consultation to be valid. Similar considerations apply to schools when they consult parents. It is important that parents are aware of the consultation. Notice of the consultation shouldn't be hidden as a single short sentence within a lengthy parents' newsletter. Schools should seek to maximise participation, for example, by providing reminders and different ways in which parents can be involved and provide their input. There must be adequate time and opportunities for parents to take part, and schools should not restrict consultation to a single meeting because not all parents will be available. If a school is consulting on a draft RSHE policy, adopting that policy must not be a predetermined decision. It must genuinely be open to changes as a result of parental consultation. Conscientious consideration must be given to the consultation process from parents before finalising an RSHE policy, and the school should be able to provide evidence of this, for example, in the minutes of governors' meetings. Parents must be given sufficient information on a proposed RSHE programme in a form that they can access and understand, so they can properly consider it and provide an informed response. For example, being able to see proposed lesson activities and materials that show what statements in the policy would mean in practice. This is especially important in areas that may be contentious with some parents. Schools must not seek parental approval of draft plans by underemphasizing controversial elements in their proposed teaching. There should be open discussion of contentious issues at the consultation stage, so that, where possible, the final policy can accommodate concerns and issues can be resolved prior to teaching commencing. Parliament has passed laws to ensure that relationships education in primary education, RSE in secondary education, and non-statutory sex education must be appropriate to both the age and religious background of pupils. Parental consultation is a key opportunity for schools to gain the knowledge of pupils' religious backgrounds they need to fulfil this requirement, and to learn parents' views of the implications of this for teaching. As part of the consultation, a school could ask parents if they have any particular religious beliefs relevant to the teaching of RSHE. Schools should also seek and consider parents' views on age appropriateness. When planning their curriculum, state-funded schools must ensure they act in a way that is compatible with the right of parents to ensure education is in conformity with their own religious and philosophical convictions. This means schools must not seek to undermine parents' views, but treat them with respect and teach in a manner which is objective, critical, and pluralistic, fairly presenting the range of viewpoints that exist. The Finnish RSE policy must be provided free of charge to anyone who requests it and be published on the school website. It must contain the following: subject content, how RSE is monitored and evaluated, how and when RSE is taught, who is responsible for teaching it, any external providers used, a parent's right to withdraw their child from sex education, how RSE content will be made accessible to all pupils, including those with special educational needs and disabilities, how parents can view RSE curriculum materials, how teachers will answer questions from children in primary schools about topics in sex education that are not on their curriculum, how teachers will answer questions about sex education from withdrawn children, how the RSE policy was produced, who approved it, and how and when it will be reviewed. The policy must clearly differentiate relationships education from sex education. It must be obvious to parents when relationships education is being taught and when sex education is being taught, so that parents have clear information. If teaching about sexual acts or sexual relationships, it is sex education. It is imperative that these lines are not blurred. This ensures that a parent's right to request their child is withdrawn from sex education is not denied because the school has miscategorized learning under relationships or health education. Reinforcing this point, the guidance states that relationships education doesn't involve explaining the detail of different forms of sexual activity. For further clarification, the parameters of relationships education were outlined by the Government Minister for Education in the House of Commons when relationships education was introduced. We do not propose a right to withdraw from relationships education at primary level, because that will focus, as I said, on themes such as friendships, family relationships, and dealing with strangers, not sex education. Pupils will learn about the characteristics of healthy relationships that we can all agree on, such as respect, commitment, tolerance, and proper boundaries. Knowing and understanding these characteristics, including how to build such healthy relationships, will help children be happy and, crucially, safe from others, such as in situations where they might try to exploit a lack of clarity about what is and is not acceptable. Occasionally, a situation may arise which a school needs to address which is outside of its plan and policy, for example, in response to a safeguarding risk. In such cases, it is imperative that parents are informed. This must be in advance if it is sex education, and any new materials must be shared upon request. In such situations, it is not always necessary or helpful to involve all pupils. It may be possible to target the group of pupils who have been affected or at risk. It would not be good practice for a school to expose children to teaching that it had previously decided was not age appropriate in order to address a situation which is not in fact relevant to them. Openness, engagement, and transparency with parents is a key focal point in the guiding principles, and a whole section of the guidance is dedicated to openness with parents about RSHE materials. This section begins by explaining to schools that they must proactively engage parents with RSHE by inviting parents into school to discuss the curriculum content and inviting them to discuss any concerns. Lack of transparency around the discussion of sexual matters with children runs counter to safeguarding principles. If schools are reluctant to be open with parents about what they are telling children, this is a good indication that the education provided may be inappropriate. Schools must ensure all RSHE curriculum materials are made available to parents upon request, and how no materials may be withheld from them. It emphasises that it is right that parents are able to see what their children are being taught, especially in relation to sensitive topics, and schools should respond positively to requests from parents to see material. Many schools have used external providers to supply them with RSHE curriculum materials, many entering into contractual agreements where their providers barred them from sharing their RSHE resources. This caused parents great anxiety, as they were being denied their right to see what their children were being taught. The guidance makes clear this must stop, stating, "There is a public interest in parents being given the opportunity to see materials used in RSHE teaching if they would like to. When contracting with external providers, schools should not agree to any contractual restrictions on showing parents any content that the school will use. Schools should communicate to providers that they are legally obliged to have regard to the statutory guidance, including the expectation that all content can be shared with parents." In case schools believe they are still liable under the contracts that they have already signed, the guidance continues. Where contractual clauses exist that seek to prevent schools sharing any material at all with parents, they are void and unenforceable. This is because they contradict the clear public policy interest of ensuring that parents are aware of what their children are being taught in sex and relationships education. Suggestions are provided for ways in which resources may be shared where copyright is a factor, but it is clearly stated that, for the avoidance of doubt, copyright law affects the way in which materials are shared, but should never be used as a reason to refuse to share them.
Although there is no requirement for schools to publish a policy for health education, it is good practice for schools to set out some of the details about how health education will be taught. Consequently, it is commonly included alongside relationships and sex education to form a school's finished RSHE policy and programme. It is important that health education is well defined. The distinction between sex education and relationships and health education is highly significant because there is a qualified right for parents to withdraw their children from sex education but not from relationships or health education. Health education, or health and well-being, as it is also referred to in the guidance, is not primarily focused on sexual issues, but it does include some teaching about physical and emotional changes in the adolescent body. As there is no right of withdrawal, it is important that teaching does not extend beyond this into areas that are controversial or that parents might consider inappropriate in light of the pupil's age or religious background. The aim of health education is to enable pupils to make good decisions about their own health and well-being, to understand the links between physical and mental health, to recognise when things are not right in their own health or the health of others, and to seek support when needed. And when properly executed, effective teaching should aim to reduce stigma attached to health issues, in particular relating to mental health. There is a specific emphasis in the guidance on the need for sensitive arrangements for girls around the curriculum content on issues of puberty, menstruation, menstrual products, and using appropriate language. Health education should be sequenced so that what is learned at primary is developed at secondary. Health education in primary starts with the benefits and importance of physical activity, good nutrition and sufficient sleep, and supports pupils to develop emotional awareness. It is made abundantly clear in primary health education, as in all of RSHE, care should be taken to avoid exposing pupils to concepts which are not appropriate for them. At secondary school, health education should build on primary content, supporting pupils to understand their changing bodies and their feelings, how to protect their own health and well-being, and when a physical or mental health issue requires attention. The guidance does go on to explain how secondary schools may choose to teach about issues such as eating disorders, self-harm and suicide prevention that are not listed in the curriculum content. However, if schools choose to teach these topics, they should be taught in a safe and sensitive way, but as specialised areas, and schools should use qualified support or advice. It continues, it is important that schools ensure that teachers are properly equipped to lead discussions about these topics, including what to do if a pupil makes a disclosure. Regarding suicide, it states specifically that schools should consult mental health professionals and put in place high-quality, evidence-based staff training before addressing suicide directly with secondary-age pupils to ensure that staff have the knowledge and skills to do this safely. It is essential that if staff teach this content, it is done with considerable planning, training and care. The guidance explains they should take particular care not to discuss instructions or methods of self-harm or suicide and avoid using emotive language, videos or images, as there is a risk that this could signpost pupils towards dangerous ideas and online content of which they may not previously have been aware. The age, experiences, and emotional and cognitive maturity of pupils must also be considered, as must the confidence and skills of teachers and, significantly, the views of parents. The views of parents cannot be realistically gauged without some kind of parental consultation on the health education curriculum content. It is advised that a similar approach is also taken if addressing eating disorders. These topics require extremely careful handling. If staff ever have any concerns about a pupil in relation to any of these issues, they must follow safeguarding procedures and without fail where a pupil disclosure is made.
RSHE is not a part of the national curriculum. Consequently, schools have a lot of freedom and flexibility when developing their RSHE programme and can adopt an approach which best serves their families and communities and responds to parents' concerns. The guiding principles state an RSHE curriculum should be meaningful, engaging, positive, inclusive, and carefully sequenced. Schools are encouraged to be relevant and responsive to their immediate and local needs. Importantly, learning should always be age and stage appropriate. The RSHE curriculum should be participative and interactive and delivered by skilled practitioners in a safe and supportive environment in a manner which aims to support and not to alarm pupils. Content intended to shock or titillate is clearly inappropriate. Proper safeguarding training for staff is essential due to the possibility of increased disclosures. Schools need to consider the content of their science curriculum so that content is not needlessly duplicated, but there may be legitimate opportunities to reinforce concepts introduced in RSHE in other subject curriculum areas. However, Whenever RSHE content is being covered, this must be transparent to parents and in accordance with the school's RSHE policy. Schools may choose to use external providers in delivering some aspects of RSHE. If doing so, schools must verify that the content will be accurate, appropriate, and unbiased, or balanced by alternative perspectives presented on an equal basis. There are many individuals and organisations which have established themselves as RSHE or PSHE advisors and self-appointed experts, taking advantage of the demand from schools for content and advice. In such cases, schools need to satisfy themselves that such claims are based in genuine expertise. There are external providers and campaign groups who intentionally use RSHE as a vehicle to access schools to promote their political and ideological agenda to children. Schools must evaluate lesson materials beforehand, as the school is responsible for ensuring that all materials used are appropriate and make them available to parents. All visitors must know and follow the school's policy on confidentiality and safeguarding, most especially the reporting of a safeguarding disclosure or concern. The following are questions we suggest a school considers when evaluating whether to use an external provider. What expertise do they have? Are they aligned with the school's RSHE policy? Do parents need to be informed and consulted? How are they enhancing your RSHE curriculum? Does the learning cover the statutory content of RSHE or go beyond it? Are the resources age and stage appropriate? Are they appropriate to the religious backgrounds of pupils? Does the input from the external provider fill a gap in what the school's teachers can deliver in-house or significantly enhance the provision? Are they advocating for a political or partisan ideological agenda? Children should not be going home confused, anxious, or upset by anything they have learnt in RSHE, or feel they or their view has been marginalised. Schools have a responsibility to parents for the care of their children and are accountable for their children's well-being.
RSHE guidance affects primary schools and secondary schools in different ways. Relationships education is compulsory for all pupils in both. However, this is not true for sex education. Primary schools have discretion over whether they teach any elements of sex education, the guidance stating that sex education is not compulsory in primary schools. Parents of primary-aged children can request that their child be withdrawn from some or all of sex education. They do not need to give a reason, and head teachers must automatically grant this request. Only required learning that is part of the national curriculum for science is exempt. The guidance does recommend that primary schools teach sex education in years 5 and or 6 in line with content which forms part of the national curriculum for science. The science curriculum for years 5 and 6 includes a statutory requirement that pupils should be taught to describe the changes as humans develop to old age. Beyond this, there is only non-statutory guidance which suggests pupils could work scientifically by researching the gestation periods of other animals and comparing them with humans, and learning about the changes experienced in puberty. If a school does choose to teach any sex education, the guidance states primary schools should consult parents about the content of anything that will be taught within sex education. This reinforces the need for schools to thoughtfully consider an age and stage appropriate RSE curriculum and to thoroughly consult parents beforehand. There is no provision for primary-aged children to be withdrawn from relationships education. When the government removed the parental right of withdrawal from relationships education, they gave clear reassurance that it was because it would not contain any sex education. The Minister for Education Edward Timpson, stated, "We have committed to retain a right to withdraw from sex education in RSE because parents should have the right, if they wish, to teach sex education themselves in a way that is consistent with their values. We do not propose a right to withdraw from relationships education at primary level because that will focus, as I said, on themes such as friendships, family relationships, and dealing with strangers, not sex education." If a primary school were to discuss a sensitive issue in response to a specific need emerging, for example, evidence that some Year 6 students were sharing naked images or viewing pornography, it should be introduced in a protective and preventative way that does not cause unreasonable alarm and does not appear to normalise risky behaviours or activities. It is widely recognised that significant numbers of children view pornography from a very young age. However, significant numbers do not, and some are effectively shielded from wider sexual content. Resource selection should be sensitive to pupils' backgrounds and experiences. They should not be exposed to inappropriate images or ideas, or to content that may provoke distress. A school could address responsive RSHE exclusively to students affected, thereby avoiding alarming unaffected children who may have no familiarity with the topics under discussion. Schools must acknowledge that many parents take great care to protect their children from harm and harmful content. Many parents do not allow their children smartphones or unsupervised access to the internet. These efforts can be undermined by a school's careless approach to RSHE. Schools must respect that parents are the guardians and first educators of their children, and schools must not expose their children to harms that they have protected their children from, even when addressing harms experienced by other children. Ultimately, the consequences of successful learning should be children who are happier and safer and know how to avoid risky behaviour. Children behaving inappropriately or in harmful ways, or becoming unnecessarily alarmed after being introduced to new learning, is a failure of a school's RSHE programme.
What about secondary schools? It is compulsory for secondary schools to deliver relationships, sex, and health education. Parents have the right to request that their child be withdrawn from some or all of sex education delivered as part of statutory RSHE. Head teachers can only refuse in exceptional circumstances, for example, when there is a clear safeguarding concern. At secondary school, RSHE will cover progressively more sensitive and delicate areas. It needs to be sequenced thoughtfully and taught with wisdom and discernment. Young people mature physically, mentally, and emotionally at different rates, and schools must consider when it's appropriate to deliver much of its content. And the guidance supports this approach. For example, on abuse, it states that different forms of abuse should be addressed sensitively and clearly at appropriate ages. It also suggests how teachers can approach more sensitive content with pupils, such as using distancing techniques, setting ground rules, and using anonymous question boxes, and that RSE should support young people to develop healthy, safe, and nurturing relationships of all kinds. The guidance is clear that effective RSE focuses on respect for oneself and others and does not encourage or normalise early sexual experimentation. Young people should be informed, but relationships education should not assume a sex-positive perspective, as this will be contrary to many parents' wishes and religious and philosophical convictions. These are protected under the Education Acts and Human Rights Act. Sex positivity is an ideological position that is contentious and political, that lacks clarity and consensus even amongst its proponents. A legitimate goal of RSHE is to nurture young people's confidence and self-esteem so that they should be able to make their own informed and ethical decisions about sex when they are old enough. But the guidance is clear that this includes to resist pressure to have sex. Pressure can come in many forms, but it should not come disguised as RSHE. Certain aspects of LGBT content have come under greater scrutiny in the new RSHE guidance that now includes a more specific focus on the facts and what the law says. Students are encouraged to have learned about all the protected characteristics by the end of their secondary education, which includes sexual orientation and gender reassignment, and pupils should understand the importance of equality and respect. At primary school, teaching about same-sex relationships is not compulsory, although some schools attended by children of same-sex parents might feel it necessary. A school may worry about Ofsted, but they should not be afraid to take the right decisions for their pupils, especially if content is not compulsory and they can provide alternative evidence of the school's work to promote respect for all people. At secondary school, all pupils will be taught about same-sex relationships as an integrated part of RSHE, alongside facts about sexual health, including sexually transmitted infections. Significantly, pupils should also be taught the facts and the law about biological sex and gender reassignment. This should recognise that people have legal rights by virtue of their biological sex, which are different from the rights of those of the opposite sex, with a protected characteristic of gender reassignment. This instruction is responding to both the ruling by the UK Supreme Court that sex in the Equality Act refers to biological sex, and to concerns about how aspects of RSHE have been poorly taught in some schools, especially around the contentious issue of gender identity. The guidance acknowledges the public debate that surrounds the issue of biological sex and gender reassignment, but clearly states that schools should be careful not to endorse any particular view or teach it as fact. For example, they should not teach as fact that all people have a gender identity. Continuing on this theme, the guidance states that schools should avoid language and activities which repeat or enforce gender stereotypes. This is a clear response to RSHE curriculum materials produced by external agencies which utilised gender stereotypes to encourage young children to believe their gender could be different from their biological sex. One activity asked children to place themselves on a gender spectrum based upon extreme gender stereotypes. This example was produced by Mermaids. Within it, Barbie and G.I. Joe are used to represent different ends of a gender identity spectrum, with children asked to determine where their gender identity sits on this continuum. Another organisation, Kapow, creates numerous resources for schools. Kapow Primary produced a detailed lesson plan for 9 to 11-year-old children, where the learning objectives included that children understand that gender identity and gender expression can be seen as a continuum. Its key themes identified sex as physical traits of the sex you assigned at birth, and expression as how you present gender, e.g., through actions and clothing. The lesson plan instructed teachers to explain to the children that people often don't fit into particular categories, and instead there is what is known as a continuum. The continuum goes from a lack of femininity or masculinity to what might be seen as extremely masculine or feminine. The lesson introduces various gender stereotypes for children to discuss, and then asks children to look again at their identity mind map and ask them if they can see anything which might contribute to their gender identity. The lesson concludes instructing teachers to remind children that their gender identity is how they feel and express themselves. This is different to sexual orientation, which is who they feel attracted to. Kapow claims its resources are used in 8,244 schools across England. These and similar resources are used by many schools, often to very young primary-aged children, and do teach, as fact, that everyone has a gender identity that can be different to their biological sex. This should not be happening in any school, under any circumstance. In tackling these concerns, the guidance is clear. Where schools decide to use external resources, they should avoid materials that use cartoons or diagrams that oversimplify this topic, that could be interpreted as being aimed at younger children, or that perpetuate stereotypes or encourage pupils to question their gender. Many children's books have been written that are used in lessons and are available in school libraries that do exactly what the guidance now prohibits. The Proud Trust has produced books aimed at young primary-aged children, converting some into cartoons that can be watched on YouTube. One example is Alien Nation. In this story, the alien leader decides whether the baby aliens go to Planet Girl or Planet Boy. Both planets have strict rules. On Planet Girl, you must like pink, you must wear dresses, you must be feminine, you must like dolls, and you must wear makeup. On Planet Boy, you must like blue, you must wear trousers, you must be masculine, you must like cars, and you must play sports. Story explains how the leader gets it wrong and was just guessing because they thought that the aliens' bodies could tell us something about what the alien would be like when they are older. The aliens agree to build a bridge between the planet's boy and girl to solve the problem so they can choose whether to cross over. However, some aliens are excluded because they feel like I'm a girl and a boy, or don't feel like I'm a girl or a boy. These aliens build their own separate planet that is described as something just as important, where they can live. The aliens then create words to describe themselves that are introduced to the children: cis, trans, and non-binary. These books are using cartoons to oversimplify this topic. They are aimed at younger children. They do perpetuate stereotypes. They do present gender identity as fact, and they do encourage children to question their gender. These and similar resources should never be used in schools under any circumstances. Diagrams have also been highlighted as a concern where they are used to oversimplify this topic. The worst examples used in schools include the gender unicorn, produced by Trans Student Educational Resources, and the genderbread person. Again, these are aimed at younger children, use cartoons and diagrams, do teach gender identity as fact, and should never be used in schools. Alongside the reckless use of these resources, some schools are guilty of encouraging children suffering with gender confusion to socially transition, sometimes without the consent or even the knowledge of their parents, creating an adversarial position between parent and child. The Cass Review emphasises the influential role that schools play in this area, stating the importance of what happens in school cannot be underestimated. This applies to all aspects of children's health and well-being. Schools have been grappling with how they should respond when a pupil says they want to socially transition in the school setting. The Cass Review found no clear evidence to support claims that social transition in childhood leads to positive mental health outcomes, but it did find transition before puberty can produce anxiety and fuel the desire to access puberty blockers. Evidence that puberty blockers or hormones are of benefit is scant, while there is evidence of potential for harm. Consequently, we find the guidance is blunt, stating schools should be mindful to avoid any suggestion that social transition is a simple solution to feelings of distress or discomfort. The factors that may lead a child to question their gender can be many and complex. Responsible adults need to be very cautious. A child's conclusions may have been led by false and misleading information online or through their peers. Social contagion may be a significant factor. Suggesting social transition as a simple solution is naive, short-sighted, and harmful. It neglects the far-reaching long-term implications that such a decision can have. The 2026 draft Keeping Children Safe in Education guidance states, sometimes young children also go through a period of questioning their gender, but for the majority, this will not continue into adulthood. And schools and colleges should remain aware of the potential vulnerabilities of children who are questioning their gender, including the possibility of complex mental health and psychosocial needs, for example relating to relationships with family, peers, or their broader social environment, including discriminatory bullying.
In its delivery of RSHE, the guidance both reminds schools of the need to be sensitive toward pupils with religious backgrounds and their duty to comply with the Equality Act, where religion and belief is a protected characteristic. In addition, examining religious beliefs and ethics is integral to a school achieving an effective and successful RSHE programme. For example, what a person believes about human life or dignity will fundamentally inform their moral decision-making on an array of key RSHE content areas, from treating others with respect to decisions about sex and attitudes towards pornography. There will never be a complete consensus on all moral issues. Therefore, understanding the diversity of beliefs is essential. Young people need to know why people make contrasting moral decisions, as this will be the context for when they make their own. Studying religion and belief will greatly help pupils to make critical, objective, informed and ethical decisions that recognise and avoid harm. Likewise, the positive development of moral characteristics in pupils, which is a complementary purpose of RSHE, will be enhanced through the learning of faith perspectives. The guidance makes it clear that all schools may teach about faith perspectives on these topics, and not just schools with a religious character. When religious beliefs are taught in RSHE, this should be made clear to pupils.
I do hope you found this webinar on how to navigate the RSHE requirements with integrity useful for your school. If you have any further questions about RSHE in England or any other education-related queries, please do not hesitate to contact the team at the Christian Institute. Our email address is education@christian.org.uk. Our phone number can be found on our website, christian.org.uk, alongside news, features, publications and resources. Thank you.
For more great content, like, subscribe and hit the notification bell.